Now, you claim your family disowned you because of her infidelity. You admit to cheating on your husband. However, you say the paternity test will prove that he is the father.
I was actually getting ready to go on a date with somebody, and I got a phone call from a friend of mine to come to this hotel party. And I get there, and our eyes met, and we kind of fell in love at first sight. We started talking, that kissed heavily that whole night. We did not have sex, though. We just made out. The next day, I called him and went and picked him up, and he took my grandmother out with us on our first date. So that night, we went back to the room, back to my house. We had sex.
You knew she was the one, too?
Yes, Your Honor. Started cheating on me with a guy she claimed that looked like Bon Jovi.
This story is a deep emotional exploration of how the truth affects relationships, identity, trust, and family bonds. At its core, it follows the journey of two individuals entangled in a web of promises, regrets, suspicions, and revelations. The relationship, once built on affection and shared dreams, becomes overshadowed by doubts and unspoken fears, many of them rooted in past generational trauma and personal emotional wounds. Judge Lauren Lake stands not simply as a legal authority, but as a figure representing the relationship between law and justice, guiding the individuals toward understanding that a court is not only a place for evidence, but a space for truth to transform lives. In this narrative, we encounter the emotional and psychological impact of DNA tests, especially in relationships strained by mistrust. The phrase DNA test people regret taking echoes throughout the story, as characters realize that the search for clarity can sometimes lead to discoveries more difficult than the uncertainty that preceded them. However, as the truth unfolds, it becomes clear that even painful revelations have the potential to bring closure, maturity, and emotional recovery. The idea that truth changes everything serves as both a warning and an invitation to growth. The courtroom becomes the evidence stage in divorce case proceedings, where heartbreak is not hidden but articulated openly. Here, every statement carries weight, every memory becomes evidence, and every feeling becomes testimony of the human condition. Legal terms such as Adverse Inference and Evidence Act take on personal, emotional meaning, where silence or absence of proof does not merely shift legal burdens. It shifts emotional states, responsibilities, and relationships. The individuals learn that the law seeks clarity, but justice seeks understanding and fairness. This dynamic highlights the ongoing struggle between factual certainty and emotional truth. The narrative also reflects the complex concept of justice in jurisprudence, illustrating that justice is not merely about punishment or vindication. It is about acknowledging pain, responsibility, and growth. Judge Lauren Lake helps the individuals understand that justice is sometimes about forgiveness, accountability, and rebuilding trust rather than division or retribution. And yet, the choice of whether to reconcile or separate remains in their hands, making justice not an external decision but a personal awakening. The story takes emotional depth from the inclusion of cheating stories, where betrayal becomes a symbol of deeper emotional confusion rather than simply moral failure. The individual who committed infidelity did not do so from a place of cruelty, but from a place of emotional instability and unresolved trauma. Yet the consequences were real: mistrust, distance, emotional disconnection, and ultimately the questioning of paternity. Cheating here is not a sensationalized act, but a reflection of emotional patterns that were never taught to heal. The spouse, in turn, handles betrayal not with immediate departure, but with patience and hope, illustrating the complexity of love, a love that endures pain because it believes that connection can be repaired. And so, the DNA test becomes the turning point. It becomes the instrument that reveals whether love will continue in unity or transition into separation. It becomes an unavoidable moment where the individuals must face themselves, their actions, their fears, their desires, their weaknesses. Because once the truth is known, there is no returning to the comfort of uncertainty. Throughout the narrative, connections are drawn to broader themes discussed in the Game Changing Attorney podcast and the Divorce Course podcast, where legal professionals examine how personal stories intersect with legal frameworks. The story reflects how courts do not just resolve disputes, they reshape lives. Paternity cases are not simply about biological relationships. They are about identity, belonging, emotional truth, and family legacy. The case also resonates with Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where individuals acknowledge that healing begins when they confront the truth within themselves. The emotional journey is further highlighted by the presence of adoption stories, full episodes, where families are formed not only by biology but by commitment, presence, and love. This raises questions about what makes a parent, biology or devotion. The narrative shows that sometimes a father is the person who stayed, cared, protected, and supported, even when doubt lingered, even when trust had to be rebuilt slowly, patiently, intentionally. Yet, the legal implications cannot be ignored. References to Supreme Court child support structure, the discussion around responsibility and moral obligation. The law states that support follows paternity, but emotional support follows love. The individuals must decide whether their relationship can be rebuilt or whether the journey forward means separation. The court cannot force love, but it can clarify the truth. Meanwhile, emotional healing becomes central. The characters reflect on how childhood experiences shape their adult fears. Emotional neglect, lack of role models, absence of stability. These unresolved wounds played a role in their choices, mistakes, and emotional reactions. Judge Lauren Lake encourages them to explore therapy, counseling, and communication as pathways toward emotional maturity. The narrative subtly references therapeutic frameworks, understanding emotional attachment, trauma, self-worth, and relational boundaries, to illustrate that healing requires intention and effort. The story also emphasizes the emotional weight of being publicly accountable in a courtroom, where personal history is spoken aloud. There is vulnerability in admitting mistakes, acknowledging hurt, and accepting responsibility. Yet in doing so, the individuals reclaim their agency and humanity. They learn that honesty, although painful, is the foundation of real healing. As the first part of the narrative closes, the emotional landscape becomes clear. Two people who once loved each other deeply now face the most defining moment of their relationship. The truth will not simply reveal the biological father. It will reveal whether trust can be rebuilt, whether love can endure, and whether healing can begin. The courtroom awaits the test results. Hearts beat faster. Silence deepens. Every breath holds emotion, because once the truth is spoken, nothing will be the same again. As the emotional weight of the situation deepens, the individuals in this case attempt to reconcile their memories and expectations with the unfolding reality. A DNA test is often seen as a scientific tool, but in these cases it becomes a mirror. It reflects not only biological truth, but also emotional truth, showing each participant who they were, who they are, and who they are now required to become. Judge Lauren Lake understands that the courtroom is not merely a place where facts are read aloud. It is where lives shift direction. The atmosphere carries the weight of years of unresolved questions, hidden frustrations, and deeply rooted insecurities. The process becomes a confrontation between personal history and undeniable evidence. The individuals participating experience internal conflict, not because the court is unfair, but because the truth disrupts the narratives they held to protect themselves. This case continues to highlight how truth changes everything. Before the DNA results, there is room for hope, denial, imagination, and emotional negotiation. Afterwards, the truth stands firm, and every relationship must adjust accordingly. For some, the truth brings relief and validation. For others, it brings loss, shock, or disappointment, but it always brings clarity. The evidence stage in divorce further illustrates how emotional decisions have long-term legal consequences. When relationships dissolve, people often try to use emotional reasoning to define fairness. However, the law requires structure, documentation, and provable claims. This is where the concept of adverse inference in evidence law becomes relevant. When one party avoids or delays providing evidence, especially evidence as crucial as a DNA test, the court assumes that the truth being avoided is one that supports the opposing claim. This reinforces the idea that truth, even when uncomfortable, is the only foundation strong enough to determine justice. Similarly, discussions found on the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, the Divorce Course podcast, and episodes of Truth Changes. Everything explore how legal decisions intersect with emotional autonomy. They examine how individuals must sometimes learn to separate personal attachment from legal responsibility. Many people struggle to accept the court's ruling because they believe emotional effort should outweigh factual requirement. Yet the court, especially under judges such as Lauren Lake, must prioritize fairness, logic, and child welfare above emotional confusion. This reflects deeply on the philosophical concept of justice in jurisprudence. Justice is not simply about who feels hurt, betrayed, or abandoned. It is about restoring balance. A child requires financial support, emotional stability, and identity. The law requires the responsible party to contribute, regardless of personal preferences or lingering conflicts between the adults. Justice, therefore, is structured compassion, firm enough to protect the vulnerable, yet flexible enough to recognize emotional realities. In the realm of real-life experiences, these cases connect strongly to cheating stories and the aftermath of betrayal. When relationships shift into spaces where trust erodes, individuals may find themselves acting out of loneliness, adrenaline, distraction, or desperation for emotional attention. But while the decisions feel small in the moment, their consequences can span decades. The emotional response to betrayal often becomes woven into one's identity, shaping how one views love, responsibility, and commitment in the future. This case also draws parallels to adoption stories' full episodes, where love and loyalty often develop without biological connection. Adoptive parents demonstrate that parenting is an action, not just a genetic circumstance, yet even in adoption, identity is acknowledged. Many adopted children seek knowledge of their biological origins, not to replace their adoptive family, but to understand themselves. This reinforces the emotional importance of establishing paternity accurately, because identity matters deeply to the human psyche. The child at the center of this dispute is unaware of the emotional upheaval. They do not understand legal filings, emotional accusations, or personal regret. They simply need care, consistency, and protection. This reminds us that child support, enforced even through the Supreme Court, is not a punishment for one parent. It is a safeguard for the child's fundamental well-being. Regardless of how the parents feel about each other, the child must not be placed in a position of economic or emotional instability. Judge Lauren Lake frequently reminds individuals that parenting does not require romantic partnership. Two people can be deeply incompatible as partners, yet fully capable of providing nurturing care as co-parents. When adults accept that their disagreements must not shape the child's environment, the path toward stability becomes clearer. This requires emotional maturity, humility, and the ability to prioritize the child over the conflict. The emotional dimension of this case also ties into celebrate recovery testimonies, where individuals face their mistakes, acknowledge their flaws, and take responsibility for their growth. Healing is not passive, it is deliberate. It requires the courage to confront the hardest truths, the ones we spent years avoiding. People often fear the truth because they fear the change it requires. But without change, the past continues to repeat itself. In situations involving cheating, the complications of self-worth, validation, and emotional disconnection are often at the core. Many people fall into relationships not because they lack intelligence or values, but because they are escaping something unresolved inside themselves. Yet emotional escape has consequences, especially when it involves intimacy that may result in bringing a child into the world. This shifts the emotional stakes from personal turmoil to lifelong responsibility. In discussing the relationship between law and justice, we recognize that legal systems attempt to create fairness through rules. Yet emotional justice requires understanding, forgiveness, and growth. Judge Lauren Lake holds a role that must incorporate both. She must enforce legal clarity while acknowledging emotional pain. She cannot change what happened, but she can guide individuals toward more stable futures. As the truth becomes established through the DNA test, the emotional landscape changes. If the child is confirmed to belong to the person in question, the emotional defenses begin to fall. They must now step forward, not only as a biological parent but as a responsible guardian. If the test reveals that the child is not theirs, a different emotional journey begins, one involving closure, disappointment, relief, or confusion depending on the individual. But no matter the result, the core lesson remains that truth is necessary. It frees the child from identity confusion. It frees the caregiver from emotional frustration. It frees the accused parent from uncertainty or denial, and it frees the court from speculation. Identity, belonging, and responsibility form the core of emotional stability. A child grounded in truth is a child with direction. A parent guided by truth is a parent who can grow and protect. And a family shaped by truth is capable of healing, even if it must rebuild from fractured beginnings. When the truth finally reaches the courtroom, it does not whisper. It echoes, and in front of Judge Lauren Lake, every secret, every doubt, every DNA test, and every broken promise becomes impossible to hide. Because in the end, truth changes everything. This story revolves around the emotional weight and life-changing consequences of a DNA test, where the search for truth collides with the realities of human relationships, family identity, and the concept of justice. In this case, Judge Lauren Lake oversees a deeply personal dispute involving paternity, responsibility, and the fragile relationships formed in moments of passion and uncertainty. The individuals involved carry not only their shared history, but also layers of personal regret, emotional scars, and the desire for clarity. The DNA test becomes more than evidence. It becomes a symbol of truth, accountability, and the emotional cost of knowing something that cannot be unknowingly undone. There are many people who later admit that they regret taking a DNA test, not because the test was wrong, but because the truth it revealed changed their relationships forever. This description explores the evolution of that emotional journey, including how the realization of truth can impact parenting roles, family bonds, legal responsibilities, and self-identity. The phrase "truth changes everything" is not just a dramatic expression here. It is the central theme that we witness unfolding. The moment results are revealed, everything before that moment becomes a memory, and everything after becomes reality. Judge Lauren Lake emphasizes that the law does not operate based purely on emotions, assumptions, or personal narratives. Instead, it operates through evidence, accountability, and equity. But in cases like these, the line between law and justice becomes blurred. The relationship between law and justice is one of the oldest questions in jurisprudence, especially in family law where emotions and legal responsibilities intersect. The law dictates financial responsibilities such as child support, but justice concerns emotional truth, identity, belonging, and the child's long-term psychological welfare. Discussions surrounding these cases often appear in conversations on the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, the Divorce Course podcast, and Truth Changes Everything podcast, where experts analyze how courtroom decisions shape families and futures. There is also a connection to broader social experience, as many cheating stories, adoption stories, and divorce case testimonies online reveal the complexity of parental identity. The effect is powerful because parenthood is not only biological or legal, it is emotional and relational. This case also touches on the theme of evidence law, specifically the concept of adverse inference in evidence act. When one party refuses, delays, or avoids providing proof like a DNA sample, the court may infer the truth from the behavior. This principle reinforces why transparency is not optional when a child's identity hangs in the balance. Judge Lauren Lake consistently reminds individuals that emotional discomfort cannot override clarity, because a child deserves certainty, stability, and truth. In studying these emotional testimonies, we witness how even celebrate recovery testimonies highlight the healing power of truth. When individuals finally face what they once avoided, it does not break them, it frees them. But first, it hurts. The truth demands restructuring of identity. The truth demands accountability. The truth demands maturity. But the result is relief, closure, and direction. Meanwhile, the realm of divorce also carries its own emotional weight. Many individuals enter the evidence stage in divorce emotionally exhausted, trying to prove betrayal, concealment, or manipulation. In these highly sensitive cases, a DNA test does not simply identify biology. It can determine custody, child support responsibility, inheritance rights, and the distribution of future emotional labor. Therefore, the emotional stakes are extremely high. The story reflects the concept of justice in jurisprudence, where justice is not just about punishment or compensation. It is about restoring the moral balance. For the child, it is about identity. For the parent, it is about responsibility. For the court, it is about fairness. Judge Lauren Lake often bridges this divide by acknowledging emotional pain while enforcing legal duty, reminding all parties that truth must take precedence over discomfort. There are also links to adoption stories, full episodes where adoptive families express overwhelming love and attachment to children not biologically theirs. These stories reveal that parental identity is not always rooted in DNA. It is also rooted in presence, sacrifice, nurturing, and emotional commitment. And yet, even in adoption, the truth of origins remains significant. Because identity shapes psychological stability, In this case, the emotional experiences mirror what many discuss in cheating stories, where one moment of passion results in lifelong consequences. Sometimes individuals search for affection, escape, validation, or emotional connection, unaware of how quickly these decisions can reshape their futures. A single moment can lead to pregnancy, a relationship can become complicated, and trust can dissolve faster than it formed. The courtroom environment under Judge Lauren Lake becomes a place where consequences are addressed, but also where healing begins. The process may involve anger, defensiveness, tears, and disbelief, but it creates space for truth to settle where confusion once lived. Judge Lake's insistence on clarity helps individuals move from emotional chaos to emotional order. This case particularly shows that responsibility cannot be selective. When someone creates a child intentionally or unintentionally, the law requires accountability. And accountability is not punishment, it is protection. It protects the child from abandonment, the caregiver from financial burden, and the overall family structure from collapse. The Supreme Court has reinforced the necessity of child support as a legal obligation that cannot be avoided due to personal disagreements or emotional distance. A parent cannot simply walk away because the relationship did not work. Parenting is not conditional on romance. It is permanent, binding, and shared. More importantly, the emotional core of this case lies in the recognition that children are never at fault. They arrive in the world innocent, unaware of the complications surrounding their conception. It becomes the duty of the adults to resolve their disputes, identify the truth, and provide an environment where the child can grow feeling secure, loved, and acknowledged.